Good morning. This will be the first walkabout tour of part of our grove. Just wanted to show you the progress of the mango trees especially. And so we'll just take a little trip over here to the northeast section of the grove. This first tree is Malika. Let's see what we can... In this section of the tree we have some small fruit. A lot of the panicles up top do not have anything. Here's some lower panicles that don't have anything. This is Neelam. Neelam tends to cluster. As you can see, there's this cluster of mangoes right here. But then we have a single mango here. So that mango is going to end up being larger, of course, than the ones that are sharing the resources here. And what's interesting is right next to this cluster of mangoes we have a more recent bloom with mangoes on it. And this year several of the trees in this area have two crops basically. This is Beverly, and again you can see Beverly has the smaller mangoes and then the larger mangoes. Beverly's normally a late mango, but perhaps we'll have some mangoes here that are earlier. Here's an interesting thing that's happened to several trees. Right here is powdery mildew on new leaves. When leaves are fresh, very young, they're particularly susceptible to powdery mildew, and we had just the right conditions when they were like about 2 weeks ago, and that has affected some leaves and bloom. This next tree here is Promchimea, and it has set a lot of fruit. Of course, with these panicles being so loaded with young fruit, there's no way that the tree can support all that. So for one of these panicles or bloom spikes, one or two mangoes is pretty much what will be left on here after the tree drops what it can't support. And let's see, way up in the tree there you can see, I can see anyway, 5 mangoes of an early set for Promchimea. Now here's Carrie. Carrie has just a few places in the lower part of the tree that it has set fruit. And at least this tree doesn't have very much at all on any part of the tree. As I said before, though, if it can maintain one for each bloom spike, that's a good thing. But this one doesn't even look like it will stay because it has a defect in it. Here's another cherry tree. Not a lot of fruit, but there's one from an early set. And this is our other Malika tree. And you can see a huge difference from the one that we started talking about at the beginning of the row. This, even though it's on the same row and just maybe 75 feet away, it's got a huge amount of early fruit and a second bloom also. And yeah, here's a fruit that's just going to fall off, so we might as well help it. Here's this later bloom spike that hasn't set any fruit. Same for that. So just a little bit of fruit on the second bloom here, but a lot on the first bloom. Here's one of our Valencia Pride. Here we have some fruit set from the first bloom, early bloom, because it was strange weather, and then we have an enormous amount of fruit in this one area of the tree from the second bloom. And as I said, we're lucky to have one or two fruit that remain on these bloom spikes. Here, as you can see from the earlier bloom, we have two fruit, and this lower one is questionable. That might just drop off. So hopefully we'll have a great year for Valencia Pride. Here's the next row. This is ice cream mango. This last bloom has set a lot of fruit. I'll get a look at the ones on the top of the tree. So hopefully it will be a better year this year for ice cream mango than it was last year. This tree always produces a lot of flowers, but often doesn't set much fruit. I'll just go through this little area here between the Malika and the ice cream. This is Namdak Mai. Those fruit are coming right along. This tree set the early crop, but doesn't have any flowers from the second crop or the more recent bloom that a lot of the trees have. If the light were a little better, this would be really impressive, but this is lemon meringue or popuculai, and it's just got an enormous amount of fruit on some of those panicles. Of course, it will be dropping. Always nice to remember that, but it's sort of nice to look at right now. This side of the tree seems to have been dominated by the early bloom and setting of the fruit. It really goes practically branch by branch. This is another branch, so we have the later bloom on that. This tree is Dupuis Saigon. Very little fruit that you see a little bit way up top of the the latest bloom. A lot of dead panicles and a little bit of fruit. Not sure if that really will come through on this, but on the top of the tree. There's one little cluster of mangoes up there. Here's a kit mango. Normally reliable late mango. This tree basically doesn't have any fruit or bloom on it. I'm not sure if we'll get a late bloom on it, an even later bloom, or if it's just going to be an off year for this tree. Right next to it is another kit tree, and it's like night and day. We've got an enormous amount of fruit that is set on the more recent bloom. Oh, on this side of the tree, which is the west side of the tree, we have some fruit that's fairly large. It's still at least a couple months away from being ready, but we have the large fruit and the small fruit. Here's Palmer. All right. So this is what powdery mildew looks like right in here. This white covering to the fruit, and you see how the stems of the panicle are dying back and are sort of whitish. We had weather that was not conducive to bloom a couple weeks ago, and so that's what happens. This mango on this side of the panicle looks good so far. The stem looks healthy, so that one might survive. This side is lacking fruit. This is the west side of the tree. But the south side looks good, and we have pretty much on the top of the tree. We'll see if that's setting any fruit. And then over here, we'll just glance at another large Valencia Pride. It's pretty much the same as the first one. We planted Valencia Pride along the fence because it's a tree that's rather difficult to keep small. We try to keep all of the trees in the grove between 10 and 12 feet tall, but I find it very difficult to keep the Valencia Pride that small, so we just put it along the fence. Okay, the next row here begins with Coggshall. And these fruit are looking very good. The Coggshall, this particular tree, set a lot of fruit from that early bloom that we had. Take a little look out back here on the south side of the tree. And then in this one section here, there's fruit from this late bloom. So we'll mostly have Coggshall very early, but then we'll have a little bit later on in the season. This is Pimsengmun. As you can tell, it's loaded with small fruit. This is another Pimsengmun. It's got a fair amount of small fruit, and then up at the top it has a few larger fruit. And a little bit on this side of the tree. So even though these Pimsengmun are basically in the same place, right next to each other, one has fruit on it that is very close to being ready, and the other does not. It could be that the tree next to it blocked more of the colder winds, or that the rootstock might have been a little bit, different for one of them. Or it could be that we trimmed one at a slightly different time, and so it threw off the timing of the tree. This tree used to be Keo Savoy, and nobody was buying Keo Savoy, so I grafted most of it over to Kerry, a very popular variety. And after I did that, people wanted to buy Keo Savoy. So fortunately we have a branch of Keo Savoy still. But I think I've got to graft a whole tree over to that variety. And here, just take a little look around. It doesn't look like this particular tree has set much fruit at all, either on the Kerry part of it or on the Keo Savoy. This is Graham, which is quite a contrast to the Kerry tree right next to it. Huge amount of small fruit. Here's a Kerry tree. It's a replacement tree for one that was blown off of its roots during a hurricane. And this Kerry tree has fruit set, a very nice fruit set too. It's already down to basically one fruit per panicle. And then we have a few larger fruit here. I guess I'll just walk around this tree so I can show you the last tree of this row is Jakarta. And Jakarta often has more than one bloom. And it certainly is true in this year where the weather was just very strange. But here is the early fruit right there. And they're not even close to being ready. Jakarta gets pretty large. These are big now, but not big enough. And here's some fruit from the later bloom. So we've got this later bloom lower on this tree, and then some of the earlier fruit there. Okay, this is the next row. Another cogswall tree, very similar to the one next to it, which had a few small fruit from this late bloom and then a lot of fruit from the early bloom. This Namdak Mai, quite a bit different from the first Namdak Mai we saw, has a lot of fruit from the more recent bloom and then some fruit from the early bloom. This is Zil Indo-Chinese. The new leaves were hit by the powdery mildew, so that's why they're marked up. And I do not see any fruit on the Zil Indo-Chinese yet. We're hoping for a very late bloom, but you never know. This is Bailey's Marvel. And there, in the very top of the tree, there's some small fruit. I don't see much on the lower branches. And way up in the top of the tree are a few of the large fruit from the very early bloom. This is Pettigrew. Those two fruit there might be the only ones for the whole tree. Oh, there's a third. There's just a lot of empty panicles. So it looks like the entire recent bloom did not set. Just a couple fruit from the early bloom. This is Kent. Got the top of the tree, has some small fruit on it. Not much toward the bottom of the tree. Another Kent. Some small fruit on that branch. And over there is another lemon meringue or Popuculi. Here's the next row. This first tree used to be a Florigon. And Florigon, we just had a lot of trees of that, so I'm converting this one to Edgar, which many of my customers had requested. And Edgar is a cross between Edward and Gary. So this is one of the earliest grafts, this one and this one. And then we have some later ones here and here. So basically I'm trying to graft onto young branches or shoots that are coming out of places near a cut to help with healing the cuts. So we'll have to check back on those. Right now I have, I think 6 of these grafts have taken. Hoping to have about 6 more take, and then hopefully we'll have some Edgar next year, but if not next year, the following year. Here's a young lemon meringue tree. It has a very nice second crop Right here, this is called a mixed bloom. You can see that there's leaves and fruit. This often happens when you have a very late bloom. The tree's sort of confused as far as if it should produce leaves or fruit, so it does both. This is our Julie tree. This is the oldest tree in the grove. Looks like it's about 10 feet wide and just over 6 feet tall. Julie's a very enthusiastic bloomer, but this year it actually has set a lot of the fruit. We hope it holds it. It did have an early bloom, and there's a few fruit in this section from the early bloom. This is Bombay. Looks like a nice year for Bombay. At least the fruit will be easy to pick. Bombay can be a big tree, and so when you get the high fruit, it gets a little less amusing to pick sometimes. But we trimmed this tree back recently. As you can probably see, there's not much of a center of the tree. It's improved light circulation, air circulation, yeah, light circulation, light penetration and air circulation, and also has diverted a lot of the energy to the lateral branches. This is Kent. Just not very much going on this tree at all. That's one of the reasons it's nice to have 70 varieties of mangoes, and some years are bad for certain trees. There's a little bit of bloom there. I can't tell if it's going to be good or not. It looks good right now, but light isn't very good for me to check colors. But right over here, the next tree is also a Kent. And look at the fruit set on this tree. It's all from the more recent bloom, but still, we're definitely have Kent mangoes from this tree. Definitely, I say, hopefully. And this is Cushman. And again, it looks like a good year for Cushman. We've got a few fruit from this very early bloom, and then a whole lot of fruit from the later bloom. While we're here, we'll check a few trees out. As I mentioned at the end of the last row, this was lemon meringue. So that tree is looking pretty good. This is Juliet, offspring of Julie mango, and Julie, as I said, is known for being an enthusiastic bloomer, but not actually producing that much fruit in South Florida. Juliet is normally more reliable, but this year it has very little fruit set so far. And the last one in this particular series along the fence is Jahangir. which is Indo-Chinese variety, very dwarf tree. Does seem to have some fruit set. Modest crop, at least from this particular bloom. A lot of times if a tree doesn't bloom or doesn't hold much fruit during one cycle, it can bloom again. So I'm not sure what's going to happen this year. One of those crazy years. Here's our next row. This is Glen. Looks like a nice fruit set on this side of the tree from the later bloom. This is a Glen tree right next door to it, and it has quite a bit of fruit from the early bloom. This is just so strange that two of the same variety side by side would have such different outcomes. But it will be nice to have two different crops of Glen. This is Edward. And Edward has, I'd say, a modest set of the late bloom. Here's another Glen tree. There's a mango from the early bloom, and then many small mangoes from this later bloom. And here's the beginning of the dot fruit set and tree. One right next door here is Bombay, so that's those larger fruit we sort of already counted on the Bombay tree. I'm just looking at the dot here. And it looks like the occasional fruit from the first bloom, but mostly second bloom. And fortunately, it looks like it set a lot of fruit. This is something that is in reach. Well, that one's certainly not going to form. That one's very questionable. But we have healthy looking panicles, and for the most part, so we'll hope that it's a good year for Dot. Here's a Beverly tree. We've got one mango there. And not seeing flowers or young fruit on this. So this particular tree is not going to have a great year. At least that's what it looks like now. Here's Southern Blush. This panicle has been hit by powdery mildew. But right here it looks, well, this part of the panicle is dying, but this part looks healthy. So one of those fruit might actually survive. These fruit are both yellow, so those aren't going to stay. Yeah. Might as well just take those fruit off. That one, this particular fruit's probably not going to last because that doesn't look too healthy to me. But there's a lot of fruit up at the top of the tree, so I think that's where most of our crop is going to come from on the Beverly. There's another Valencia Pride, pretty much the same story, with a lot of fruit set from this later bloom and a pretty good set from the early bloom too. Okay, now this is the second to the last row. I'm just going to go down the east side of these trees because the lighting will be better. This first tree is Zill. It has a large amount of this later bloom setting, and then we have some fruit from the early bloom too. So, looks like a good year for Zill. It's the lower panicle. Of course, as I said, it's going to drop all but a couple of these fruit. Here's a lower bloom with some powdery mildew here. This one's dropped already, and this will drop right because you can tell that this part here is dying back. Even though this is green, it won't be able to support that. But we have plenty of other, well, not so much plenty of fruit on this panicle, but probably one of these will develop. We'll see. But Zill is a tree that's hard to keep at a contained size. And the fruit are good, but they're not extremely popular. So this is another project tree. Been grafting this over to a newer variety called Venus. You can see right here the buds are swelling, so that looks like it's going to be bursting through the paraffin. This one here, the color doesn't look good at all, and you can just actually mush it. So that one we'll need to graft this particular shoot again. I grafted up higher on this one, so in case it didn't take, then I have this area down here to graft again. This particular branch I'd like to have converted because as it grows, it will help heal this cut. Here's Duncan. And you see that whole section of the tree has new leaves instead of flowers. And then in this area, we have the flowers that have turned to fruit. It's often the case as one cluster of the tree will act differently than another. No, not much fruit over in this area. So that one area was the heaviest. This is Van Dyke. There's a few fruit there, but mostly young fruit and very sparse in most areas of the tree. Over here on the north side of the tree, it has the most small fruit of any of the areas of the tree. This is sweet tart. One fruit from the early bloom and lots of small fruit from the later bloom. This tree is small because it's a replacement tree for one that was not growing very well. It's a certain variety that wasn't doing well for us. And here's a carry tree, in sharp contrast to the first two carries on the tour. It has some very nice looking fruit on it right now. And a modest amount of fruit from the second crop. Here's another Beverly tree. We have fruit from the first bloom and fruit from this latest bloom too. Here's another case of powdery mildew hitting these leaves when they were young. Here's a lemon meringue tree. Have some larger fruit and some very small fruit. Another lemon meringue tree. You can see on this one that almost all the fruit is on the southwest side of this tree. Quite a good fruit set here. You just go around the tree to the east side of the tree. Unfortunately, we have some fruit from the latest bloom, but just nowhere near the amount of fruit as on the southwest side. This might be our first year for Valkyrie. This is a Valkyrie tree. And we planted it because several of our customers requested this variety, so I'm hoping that they'll be able to eat it this year. This first tree is Fairchild. Fairchild had a very nice early set. So we have what looks like a very good crop of Fairchild this year. And right next to it, this tree used to be Irwin. It's been about a 2.5-year project, but I've converted this to Carrie. And how I did this was the first cut was this one. This is the north side of the tree. And I left the rest of the tree intact. And when shoots started to form on this side of the tree, I grafted onto them. And this is the graft here and over here. And after this side of the tree got established, then I cut this branch next, and as soon as I could, grafted onto those, so there's 2 major branches there, and then cut the final branch. And I've got 2 recent grafts here, and then this one was from a few months ago. We actually got fruit from this tree from the north side last year. I'm not sure if it'll bloom this year or not, but next year it should be in good shape for having a good crop. This is Duncan. It's a young tree, but has a good amount of young fruit on it. Another Nam Dak Mai. Nice early fruit set on this tree. Very, very few small fruit from the later bloom, so it looks like Nam Dak Mai will be an early variety this year. Or it always is fairly early, but we won't have a second crop from it. This is Pineapple Pleasure. It's a replacement tree for Vianado. Vianado did not taste good, the ones that we grew in Florida, so the conditions must be quite a bit different in Colombia, where it's from. Pineapple Pleasure, this has been in the ground for a few years, and hopefully we'll get a nice crop for this size tree, but it's hard to say how many of these fruit will hold. And this is Rosa, which is almost always our first variety of mango to be ready. We've already started picking some of these. It's from Brazil. Very nice taste, but very firm fruit, and it also is prone to anthracnose, and so doesn't damage the fruit very much, but it doesn't look nice. It's these black spots here, anthracnose. So this is the north side of the tree. Fruit are smaller and less plentiful. We'll do one final tree. This is turpentine. Turpentine, of course, is actually a delicious mango, but has fiber. And this is the best year that I've seen in 18 years for this tree.